The Elder Scrolls often cast the player as a messianic hero who has been written about in ancient prophecy, but in truth you always end up more an Indiana Jones type than an Anakin Skywalker. In these first-person role-playing games, the player becomes the archaeologist of a strange, beautiful fantasy world that has been painstakingly layered with visual and textual narrative that he or she decodes in order to create meaning. The world of Tamriel that Bethesda has created is so enormous and detailed that it allows them to tell stories from a god's eye macro view of the world, layering the narrative all the way down to the ants crawling on the tree stumps. In 1996, The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall's unprecedented explorable landmass was practically devoid of micro-details, because the world relied on random generation to create it. Random generation, while allowing for incomparable immensity, severely limited the designer's ability to use the environment to tell a complex story. When Todd Howard took creative control of The Elder Scrolls in 2002 with the third installment, Morrowind, he chose to make a smaller world that could be handcrafted by Bethesda designers to imbue it with layers and layers of narrative. Morrowind introduced Bethesda Clutter, environments full of objects that reveal insights about the people who dwell there. For example, a peek under the bed of your spy contact Caius Caceres reveals an empty wine bottle and drug paraphernalia, details that give depth to an NPC that would otherwise be just another quest-generating mannequin. This clutter is used in practically every environment, telling the story of the characters living there, including the light reading preferences of demons. Though criticized for being a bland and monotonous high fantasy environment, the game world of Cyrodiil in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion is practically bursting at the seams with wonderfully layered storytelling that requires little knowledge of game lore in order to appreciate. In fact, the outward cheeriness of the high fantasy setting only enhances the game's ability to tell more interesting stories. How? Contrast. I like to think of Cyrodiil less the Mayberry of Tamriel, and more the Lumberton of David Lynch's Blue Velvet, a seemingly idyllic place with a disturbing hidden underworld of vice and violence. Dark things happen in Cyrodiil, very dark things, but not out in the open. Howard and his team layered them in the game world for intrepid archaeologists to uncover.
By the way, do you happen to know what the fine is here in Cyrodiil for necrophilia? Just asking.
One outstanding example is found in the isolated village of Hackdirt. You may have been sent there on a quest looking for a missing Argonian girl, or may have just stumbled upon it by chance while exploring. In either case, once there, you realize that there is something more going on with the residents besides offering a place for your character to sleep, stock up on potions, and unload treasure.
Make it quick.
For one, the residents of Hackdirt are unusually and deliberately ugly, and in Oblivion that's saying something. They are also extremely hostile to outsiders, and charge exorbitant markups at the local store. If you poke around a bit in the village chapel, you'll find that their sermons don't come from any book of the 9 gods of Tamriel, but from the book called The Bible of the Deep Ones. You don't have to know anything about game lore, or even to read the book, to understand that a book called The Bible of the Deep Ones is some seriously dark stuff. So what does that reveal about the community that draws its sermons from it? Poke around further and you'll discover, hidden out of sight in the back of the general store, a hatch that leads to a dank underground cave where you'll find the poor Argonian girl who had been kidnapped by the inbred psychos of the town.
Please, let me out of here. You must help me escape. I think these creatures plan to do something horrible to me tonight.
You elves are all the same. All flesh and no fury.
To summarize, you might say that this story had at least 4 environmental layers that are used to tell it. The first being the fantasy world of Tamriel, a layer that exists in the player's imagination. And second, the province of Cyrodiil, an idyllically beautiful forested place that is home of the Empire. And third, the strange isolated village of Hackdirt, populated with hostile, ugly weirdos. Fourth, the underground torture chamber where the Hackdirt Brethren keep their prisoners. By reading and then decoding these contrasting environmental layers, the player can infer a narrative that the designers haven't written in words but in visuals, and whose beginning, middle, and end are unique to how the player decides to act and reacts to the player's interpretations. It is this style of narrative that makes the interactive medium unique in literature.
I can't thank you enough for your kindness.
My favorite bit of visual storytelling in the game, perhaps any game, concerns a boarded-up house in the northeastern city of Cheydinhal in Oblivion. Cheydinhal is a lovely little place with quaint architecture, a handsome stone-grey chapel, and a pleasant, shallow river running through the center. It was strange then to find an apparently abandoned house with boarded-up doors and windows sitting inconspicuously on the north side. You could easily miss it if you're walking by in a hurry, and unless you're exploring every nook and cranny of the town, you'll likely never find it. When I first saw it, it was odd enough to pique my curiosity. I checked over my shoulder to make sure the town guards weren't looking, and I hopped over the fence and into the unkept yard. Inside, the place was utterly silent. It was dark, dusty, and full of spiderwebs, the home's few furnishings broken and useless. I poked around in the cupboards and drawers, but didn't find much of interest. I might as well left the place at this point, but there was one other thing of interest, a basement door. My archaeologist sense tingled at that, and I took a chance to venture inside. When I saw that in the back of the basement there was a hole in the wall leading into darkness, I knew that my instinct had been right, and a few steps in, I started to regret it. A weird purplish light was visible, and I started to hear ominous low-frequency sounds. At the end of the stone corridor was a bizarre door with a skull on it that whispered questions to me when I approached it.
What is the color of night?
There are no overt indications what this door is or where it leads, which only enhance the mystery and surreality of discovering it. Why is it so effective? Layers and contrast. The contrast of that scary, mysterious hidden door, which I didn't know at the time was the entrance to the Dark Brotherhood Assassin's Guild, to the delightful town of Cheydinhal, and the way the designers allow you to stumble upon it by your own archaeological curiosity, building the suspense layer upon layer, and making the player an active participant in the narrative in both a mental and physical way, represents the potential of interactive storytelling and cannot be experienced in any other medium.
Hello.
The latest installment of the Elder Scrolls uses layers, but instead of the harsh thematic contrast we see in Oblivion, the layers work together in more complementary ways to express the overall bleakness of the game world. Set in the harsh, rugged northern province of Tamriel, Skyrim is a place where hardy men and women eke a living out of the unforgiving, frigid land, and the environmental storytelling works to reinforce this idea to you.
You've got a lot of nerve showing yourself in this town again. What do you have to say for yourself?
The first jaw-dropping discovery for me was a half-frozen mammoth I stumbled across in the glacial north of Skyrim. I'm by no means an expert in Elder Scrolls lore, but I knew enough for it to tell an evocative little story. Recognizing that the spear and arrows stuck in the animal were of Dwemer origin, and that the Dwemer had long since vanished off the face of Tamriel, an ancient struggle for survival in a hostile environment plays out in the player's imagination. The best moment of layered visual storytelling so far in Skyrim for me was found in a remote lighthouse not too far from the Frozen Mammoth. It sits on the top of a glacial peak overlooking the northern sea. The dead horse rotting by the front door speaks of the horror that awaits inside. A woman's corpse lies next to the dead husk of the dreadful poisonous creature that killed her. Searching the journals in the lighthouse interior reveals that it had been converted into a family home for a couple and their 2 children who had immigrated from Hammerfell, a province on Skyrim's western border. Through these diary entries, we read that this family had bought the lighthouse hoping to find peace nestled in Skyrim's solitude. What they found out, however, was just how cold, cruel, and indifferent Skyrim can be. In the basement, you'll find a familiar opening into darkness. Following the path, you realize that the lighthouse was connected to underground ice caverns that the goblin-like Falmer had been using as a breeding space for the poisonous creatures. You find the bodies of the rest of the family and realize that they were captured by the Falmer and dragged into the caverns. Accompanying the dead body of the young daughter of the family is a bloody note that thanks her father for leaving a dull iron knife with her so she could end her own life before enduring too much torment. The visual layers that create this story work in tandem with the overall lore and mythology of Skyrim to communicate the notion that the northern province is a brutal, unfriendly place for anyone, let alone foreigners. What's all the more amazing is the fact that this story never forces itself on players, but is only experienced if first you actually find the lighthouse in your travels, and then actually read the documents and environments that piece it together in your mind. I only hope that more games will abandon passive, linear storytelling techniques like cutscenes and on-rails gameplay that restrict the player from being the free-roaming archaeologist of the game world. The freedom to piece together the narrative ourselves from reading the environment is a far more interactive and satisfying experience than traditional techniques that have been cribbed from cinema, and speaks to the limitless future that games have as the storytelling medium of choice.